across. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to possibly our final discussion on the book of Esther for now. And we are looking at Esther chapter 9 and starting from verse 20 and reading all the way down to 31, and then we'll go on to chapter 10 after that, if time allows. So I'm looking for one excitable person to jump up and down and agree to pray with us, and then I need someone to do that reading from chapter 9. Any volunteers?
I'll pray.
Thanks, Mandy. Go for it. We'll sort out the reading. I haven't read for a while. Maybe I should read if everyone else has been quiet. Right, go for it, Mandy.
Father God, I just thank you for the opportunity yet again to meet together daily, Lord. And then you always said that it was good to meet together daily and edify and build up and encourage. And Lord, I just thank you that we've had this opportunity for so long now. And it's absolutely amazing. And Lord, I just pray that today will be no exception, that there'll be some real nuggets that fall out of heaven today that edify, build up, encourage, and bring about godly wisdom in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Mandy. We all need godly wisdom. Right. Looking at this passage, any volunteers to read rather than have my voice too loud in this today? Any volunteers? Jenny, Kitty, Sue? I'll take the silence as a response. I'll get reading. Verse 20 of Esther 9. And Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in the provinces of King Xerxes, both near and far, obliging them to keep the 14th day of the month of Adar, and also the 15th day of the same, year by year, as the days on which the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month that has been turned for them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews accepted what they'd started to do and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, which is to cast lots, to crush and destroy them. But when it came before the king, he gave orders in writing that his evil plan that he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the term pur. Therefore, because all that was written in this letter, and all they'd faced, and what they'd faced in this matter, and what had happened to them, the Jews firmly obliged themselves and their offspring, and all who joined them, that without fail they would keep these 2 days, according to what's written, and at the time appointed each year, that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, in every clan, province, and city, that these days of Purim should never fall into disuse among the Jews, or should the commemoration of these days decease among their descendants. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai, the Jew, gave full written authority confirming the second letter of Purim. Letters were sent to all the Jews, to the 127th provinces of the kingdom of Assuerus, in the words of peace and truth. In these days of Purim should be observed at their appointed seasons, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther obliged them, and as they had obligated themselves and their offspring with regard to their feasts and their lamenting. The command of Esther confirmed these practices of Purim, and it was recorded in writing. Here we go. Shall I just continue the next little bit? I'll just do that. Chapter 10. There's only a few verses. And King Ahasuerus imposed tax on the land and on the coastlands of the sea, and all the acts of his power and might, and the full account of the honour of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was among the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to his people. Okay, so this is coming to the end of the book of Esther, and it's a series of letters that go out. So the first one goes from the king, on behalf of the king, to all the Jewish people in all the provinces. And I think if you just think of the communications, because sometimes I think of those kind of things, the communications have gone up. First one was, yeah, choose a day, go for this, written by Haman, but on the authority of the king, because he had the king's signet ring, something that was for his own interests, something that maybe a long-held grudge from his background that he wanted to carry out. And then the second letter goes out after Esther's two feasts and the turnaround and the wind of change that blew across. And as a result of that, it said Jewish people can arm themselves and defend themselves. And also Mordecai was, in a strong position then. And so from that, this is now another communication. So after the whole event, after the whole occasion, you've got the king sends something out saying, hey, everyone, you need to party on this day every year by order of the king. Have a party, go for it. And actually you find out later it was probably Mordecai that wrote that letter on behalf of the king and instituted this great feast. And then you get a letter from the queen, which we haven't had any letters from the queen, and the queen didn't seem of enough significance to send out letters previously. Suddenly you've got this very significant queen in Esther, and she's sending letters out backing up what Mordecai is saying and encouraging it on. And you've got this going out all over the land, and you've got the king actually taking action on this as well. You've got the whole seat of power has suddenly, the wind of change has turned, and boom, it's all there. And I think it shows something of the heart of kings in their rule. They are very, very subject to opinions and advice and the things that go around. This king has done a U-turn but stayed in power. That doesn't often happen to politicians in a democracy. But actually in this kind of dictatorship, okay, just decided to do something different, total opposite to where I was going. The wind has totally changed direction, and all the backups there from the king. It's just a really interesting dynamic. So we might end up on some of that. But in this all, God has acted to save the Jewish people, and he's used Mordecai and Esther to do it, and totally turned the heart of the king. And you sort of think, wow, God is the character in the story that isn't shown, but shines through at every opportunity, and it's beautiful. So I'll just open it up for any discussion. Go for it.
I think two things struck me. One, the letter writing. In the world of law and law courts, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. That's the general rule. But not only is this written down, it's celebrated every year as well. And I think the other thing that really strikes me about this, all the other feasts and festivals were ordained by God himself. And yet the Jews still celebrate this, and it's been ordained by the king of Persia.
Yeah.
And I think, how often do we think that things have fallen on deaf ears and people haven't it hasn't sunk in. No one's heard us. I mean, anyone that's ever done any public speaking, I think it very seldom you get anybody who's nodding in agreement with you, and if you get that, you tend to focus on them because they're the encouragement that actually something's going in, and most people sit there listening with very very blank faces, and it's very easy to come away with no one's heard me. I don't know why I bothered. That's half an hour of my life I'm never going to get back. And then a week later, you find that someone has acted on something you said.
Yeah.
And I think the king is a little bit like this, where to start with, he's being very sort of blank faced when it comes to Esther. Oh, well, she's nice and pretty, isn't she? You know, I don't mind spending a couple of nights with Esther. That's lovely. And then Mordecai and Esther start to do the work that they do together, and look at it now. Esther is written down in history, never to be forgotten. And even an evil king who started off as an abusive king says, let's celebrate the day God delivered my white people. It's not even his people, it's his white people from a really bad decision that I made. And I just think that's amazing, really. It's sunk in.
Yeah. Thanks, Mandy. Anyone else like to chip in? Feel free to go for it. I'm sort of thinking that you started there with, you know, a verbal agreement is not worth the paper it's written on, kind of, you know, or it isn't written on, and I think you know, that sense of being backed up in writing, and the authority of a king. But I'm also curious, the festival being set up that's run for thousands of years was set up by a pagan king and has observed. And actually you think Jeremiah's advice, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I've carried you, if it prospers so shall you. And the people like Esther and Mordecai and many others who applied themselves in a strange land got over some of the difficulties they were struggling with, pushed through that, pushed through the loss. I mean, Esther's lost both her parents, been adopted by Mordecai. It says at the end, the daughter of, and Mordecai. And you're thinking, yes, you know, it's she's in a secure place. But actually that, having to work through all those issues they must have had to work through over generations, and try and come out the other side of that, and actually have the wherewithal to say, right, we are going to plough our lives into this new land we've been taken to in captivity by our we're going to plough ourselves into that and help make it prosper. And I think that's an incredible thing, and here we see some of the fruit of it, where the Jewish people were one of the people groups under the king. All of a sudden they are honored as this isn't just Daniel, good lad, yeah, you can be honored, you can rise to the second position. This isn't just Joseph actually in Egypt, hey, you can rise to this position, you've done it all, well done, good lad. This is Esther and Mordecai raised to a high level, and also all the Jewish people with them. You think, wow, there's a dynamic in this that is so exciting, goes beyond some of the things you see in the story of Daniel and others working through the same issues as these guys. I think it's incredible. Mandy?
I think when you mentioned where it says the daughter of Abihail, I find that's something that I don't think would happen in modern Western cultures. Honouring the parents who have gone before, even though she'd been brought up by Mordecai, because we're talking about a culture that is very bloodline orientated, and it takes me back to when the daughters of what's his name went to Moses and said, well, this isn't fair, we've got no brothers. And Esther is like that daughter that has got, well, I've got no brothers, but look, I've got the inheritance of Abihail, and I'm going to honour my father even though he's dead, because look what his bloodline has produced. And obviously she's honoured Mordecai in that as well, because he's brought her up and part of her bloodline. But I think I think there's a when you look at that from a New Testament point of view, so the Jews honoured their parents because their parents gave them life. That was the general kind of thought behind it, that your parents gave you life. So even if they weren't godly, you still honour your parents, because when all's said and done, God used them to give you the life that you now breathe. And I think of that in the culture where so many people blame their parents for absolutely everything, and you're just like, oh, for goodness sake, honour your parents because you would live long in the land. And that is something that follows all the way through to the New Testament. Honouring your parents. And I just wonder what blessing there was on Esther, because she and Mordecai honoured her father and honoured her bloodline, because there is a blessing on that. And so there wasn't just blessing because she was in the right place at the right time, not just blessing on her marriage because that had come together, but there was blessing on everything, because not only had she done stuff, like I said yesterday, doing things right at home, but she had done everything right according to the law all the way through. And she'd taken the advice of the people she was meant to take advice from. So ultimately, she gave honour to God because she kept the law. And I think, when we're doing stuff and saying stuff and being, and, it's how much honour goes to God. And yes, we don't have to keep the law in the same way that Esther did. I don't want to put that on people's shoulders. If you want to keep the law, then by all means keep it. That's your decision. But the law is fulfilled through Christ. So now it's how much Christ-likeness through us honours God in the situations that we're in.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks, Mandy. You've managed to bring the hidden member right into the fore beautifully. Thank you. Sue? Sorry, you're mute. Go for it.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even put anything up there, Nigel. I was just going to put my hand up. I like the passage on 22, because it says, as the time when the Jews got relief, I mean, relief seems a bit understatement, doesn't it, really? But from their enemies, and the month when their sorrow was turned into joy, and their mourning into the day of celebration, he wrote them to observe the days as the days of feasting and joy, and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So it seems like they're reminding where they've been and what they've gone through, but don't forget other people. Don't forget and pass this on, type thing. To me, as I read that, it's like all what the fingerprints of God has been in your life. Remember that, because this is going to take you further. And it's just that remembering of that feasting and that joy from being in where they were. It's very easy as we're in one position, and it can be really bad that your life changes around and you really do forget what happened. And that little passage just reminded me of that, really. That it's so easy to forget the poor, forget the others that are not as still struggling.
So I think that's brilliant, Sue. So what you're saying is, in a way, that celebration of this feast of the relief, and you said that's a mild term for something pretty major, and actually the day that their mourning turned to a holiday. It's a lovely phrase.
It is, isn't it?
And the day our mourning turned to a holiday is the day we met Jesus.
Yeah.
And you sort of think that sense of boom, sudden life.
Yeah.
But the impact of that life is not just for us, it's for others.
It's for everyone, it's for others.
And it's for everyone. And to remember those around you who haven't got what you have. And those kind of things is a really powerful reminder of the gospel, isn't it? It's
brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Love it. I love it. Yeah, so much so. to give thanks to the one that's done it and put everything in place. I mean, more, you can't look through Esther where God's not in it all the time. You know, all the time God is putting things in place for the right time. This is a time as this, and we have to just trust in that. Yeah.
And I think this is really incredible. I mean, you've made me think, Sue, and my brain started whirring now on a few things. Basically, Mordecai was sat in sackcloth and ashes outside at the king's gate.
Yeah.
And Esther goes, there, Mordecai, have some clothes to wear. and you don't look dowdy in front of the king. Come on, you know better than that. Here's some clothes. If you're short of clothes, here's some clothes. You've got no excuse. Mordecai refused to wear them. He sat in his state of mourning. And then all of a sudden the king has I can't sleep. I need some boring coat. I need Hansard. I need Hansard read to me. So he's kind of like, bring out the old goat skin with Hansard on it and read it to me. And as they're reading, he suddenly realizes, wait, I haven't honored Mordecai. And he saved my life. Yeah. And so Mordecai is taken from sackcloth at the king's gate in a condemned state onto a horseback led by his enemies, honoring what's happened. And then that is an image of what happens later. Yeah. It is almost like a prophetic acting out of what's about to happen. And if you think about it, Haman's relatives, advisors, family, wife, etc., said you're done for as soon as that occurred. It was almost a prophetic sign of what was to come, and everyone said you're done for now, Haman. Nothing had actually happened to make Haman done for, but because of that action, they said you're done for. He went to the second feast with his wife's words in his ear, you're finished, mate, you've begun to fall. And here you've got the story plays out with the day that mourning was turned to a holiday. The day Mordecai in his sackcloth was draped with the mantle of the king and put on the best horse and led out with Haman shouting, "Blessed be Mordecai!" I mean, that must have hurt. Do you know what I mean?
Must have hurt. Yeah. It's like it's like them nagging voices in your head when you're going through things. You know it's not God. You know he doesn't do those things. And you're fighting that battle, but then all of a sudden God comes through. You go, yes, it's worth standing on the word of God, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, it's so like gets us through, and it's that type of when it's just it's amazing. As you say, as you put it like that, it's just like an unfolding. It's so revealing. It's so unwrapping. There's so much lovely things in this that you could relate to in everyday life, even now. Yeah. So it's not when people say this is a Bible many years ago. No, this is what happens now, but in a different way. We just have to be aware of it, really. That we have the power of sin and darkness.
And looking at this, I think sometimes God now does things that indicate a wind of change.
Yeah.
I was reading something the other day, and I just read the paper, and I thought, wow. It's a tiny little thing, one little and I thought that is in the opposite direction to the way a lot of things are going in the world at the minute. I think the wind's begun to change.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that thought came. And here we find an example of Mordecai being put on a horse, and even Haman's advisors are going, "You're done for, mate," because this is an indication of the wind of change. And I'm not going to sing that song, but who sang the winds of change? Was it Bruce Springsteen?
Oh, it might be.
Something like that. But anyway, the wind, that change in just how things are going to work, and I think it happens in the spiritual realms first, and then it happens in the world. I think there are sometimes spiritual things that come across nations and come across situations, and there's sometimes indicators on the ground, like Mordecai coming from his sackcloth straight onto a horse draped in the king's clothing, that was to happen later. There was actually something unraveling in the spiritual that came into the physical. I think it's just interesting. It makes
is
me think.
interesting.
I know it's all from silence and stuff, but
I know.
I'm thinking I've
I
seen
know.
it. Yeah.
I mean, I was reading a book this morning a little bit. It's Your Friend. I can't think of the name at the moment. But it's running the race. But it's like your circumstances or whatever we're in doesn't rule your life. You know,
Yeah.
whatever we're in, there's to go for is, it doesn't stop you seeking your promises, your way of what you've got in your life, your giftings, what
Yeah.
God's given you. Doesn't stop you doing that. It can easily do. You can be stuck. But that didn't either for Esther. That didn't stop Esther, did it?
No.
Circumstances didn't stop Esther. Amen. Right,
Yeah.
okay, letting someone else talk now.
Thanks, Sue. That's brilliant. Some great thoughts there. It's all gone very quiet, which means everyone's on mute. So I would say there's something else here just to bring up while we're looking at things, and that's in chapter 10. My question is, why have a chapter 10? So the guys who put the chapters onto so we could find our way around the Bible. That was it's not the Bible wasn't written with chapter 1, chapter 2. No, it's just a big long scroll of things, and then someone's gone through and gone, I think that's a verse, this is a verse, this is a verse. Okay, I think we'll put a chapter in there because it's a kind of change onto a different subject or a different type of thing, and so they put chapter breaks through the verses. I just don't know why anyone put chapter 10 in. It's only a few verses, and it doesn't seem like that big a jump from one thing to the other. It looks like it would fit very neatly in there. I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on that, any reason why chapter 10 even exists. Why isn't it just extension to chapter 9? Sorry to ask difficult questions that I don't know the answer to.
No, I mean, there could be 1,000,001 reasons, couldn't they? But chapter 9 finishes with where to go from? So he sent the letters out. But it says to establish these days of Purim at their appointed times, just as Mordecai the Jew and Esther had imposed, and just as they had imposed on themselves and their offspring regulations of the fast and their lament. So it's not although the king's backed it up, it's Mordecai and Esther who has imposed this, and the command of Esther established these practices of Purim, and it was written on the scroll. So that's what Esther and Mordecai have done. And then you go into chapter 10, and it says King Ahasuerus imposed forced labour on the land, the islands, and the sea, all work of his authority and powerful deeds. So chapter 9 is what's been imposed by Mordecai and Esther. Chapter 10 starts with what's been imposed by the king, and actually, in a way, it kind of shows that the king hasn't changed as much as you'd like to hope he has, because he's gone back to imposing forced labour on the lands, islands, and seas, and taxes to show of his greatness. And it's almost like, well, I want to do this to make my wife happy because I love my wife now, and I know that she's great and wonderful. So we'll keep the lady happy, and she can have all this bit of power in her own people. But I'm still king, and I impose across the entirety of my kingdom, and that's how it comes across to me.
Yeah, it's a separation from to say the king's done this, but it's also saying it's almost like the narrator has finished, And is this the end note to just summarize it? Like you might find a book that finishes, and then the second bit is to say, yeah, you can find all the details in the annals of the kings of Media and Persia. And the king imposed the taxes, not Mordecai. Just let's get that clear. Maybe that's the line that's been drawn. But it's an interesting one. I just puzzled why chapter 10 existed, really. But yeah, very interesting story. Lots in it. I think if we were to write a manual on how to engage society and how to deal with powerful people in society and how to be godly in it and put up with terrible things that those societies act on and so on, and overcome and overcome and overcome. This is a story, this is a manual on how to engage secular society, how to engage any society, really. God causes things to rise to the top. God causes things of influence to arrive right up the top of things. And I think that's really, interesting. I was surprised that I'm not saying he had faith in Jesus or anything like that, so please don't get me wrong here. But Saddam Hussein's advisor, or one of his spokespeople, was from a Christian background. And I thought, how on earth did that happen? Do you know what I mean? But there is things where people, I'm not saying he was right or wrong. He was hunted by the Americans, so he probably wasn't a good guy. Okay, so I'm just saying that. But it's interesting. You sort of think, wow, that stood out. And I think in lots of different settings, it's how we live for Jesus, that consistency, that integrity, that character, those kind of the boring things, but are the very, very necessary. Those cause things to rise to the top. I remember going to a lecture on society, and given by someone who's now in the House of Lords, and when they were saying it's the boring things that change things in countries. It's the attending the school governors meeting. It's the going through the motions of the tenants rep meeting and going through the council meeting. We've just turned. It's sitting on the planning department and slowly chiseling away at things. That's the stuff that changes nations. It's the boring stuff that changes nations. It's rarely the exciting things that change things. And a guy in the front row stuck his hand up and went, I disagree. I'm a school governor and it's very interesting and exciting. And the person speaking to him just turned round and said, is there conflict going on in your school? And he goes, yes, huge conflict. That's the only time it's interesting. And then moved on. and it is. It's the day-to-day character stuff that God uses to transform things. It's the day-to-day walking with him, filled with his life, filled with his wisdom, listening to him, walking with him, that actually is the stuff that changes things over time. And I think so often we want the exciting wham, zam, bam, but actually that helps to change things, but it doesn't do the major change that consistency does. And so, there's a lot of lessons in this book. And I think it's very, very exciting. I think it's almost like, you could almost, this is the manual on how it's done, trusting God. And I'm also conscious, something that was raised last night in our Wednesday night meeting. We're doing the grief course, and we're going to be doing that up till Christmas. Hopefully we managed to open a second one, because the first one's, I think, nearly full. But there was something that someone shared last night and said we cope with loss the whole way through our lives. And this course has some of that in it. It says, when you were born, you moved from a state of comfort in your mother's womb to the outside world. There's some loss there of connection. But then you still had your mom. Then you still had that connection. But then you go off to nursery school and you're separated. There's loss, but you learn to cope with that loss. And then you go through the next stage of life and there's loss, and you learn to cope with that. Our whole life is coping with loss and rebuilding and coping and moving on and working through things. And that is powerful. Wise words. And I just think in some ways, working from a place of being captives with people around you who've been killed, going through the absolute mess of all of that, being dragged off to a strange kingdom under punishment from God. So how do you even pray when you know it's because you've disobeyed God? How do you even work through those things? But these people worked through the loss, they worked through the pain, and they rose right to the top. And I think that's incredible. It's a lesson on so many levels. Anyway, I'm gushing a bit. Anyone else want to chip in? We haven't heard from Kitty or Jenny. But you're welcome to chip in. Anyone, really.
I think from what you're saying, Nigel, I think there's also another element that very often it's the things we don't want to do and don't like doing that change society too. And I had something else in my head, but it's gone now, so it can't have been that important.
I don't know. It might come back.
Might be.
Sue, did you have something to add?
Doubling up what you said in a way, that time of loss, we all lose something in our lives and we all have to build up again. I think that's really strengthening to know that you can do that. You've done it, you've coped with it, and you do it again and again. Having others around you helps. I was just thinking, even like Maggie just said this morning, how long we've done this studying for. We've done it every day, haven't we? Since May, March, when it first started. That's amazing, isn't it? It's gone really quick, but it's been building us, and it's been something we would never have done without this terrible thing happening with it. Well, we might have done, who knows? It's made room for it, that's for sure. And that's what God does, doesn't he? He just puts something there for building or something you down. And I don't know, if you look at the whole thing, it's like an weaving tapestry, if you like. We've always goes back to the tapestry, but it is like God interweaves himself in amongst of all the things that are going on, and I love that. I just love that he weaves things, the good stuff when the bad stuff's going on. But I just, what was I think? I'm a bit like Maggie. It must be the brain goes again. I think it's just so encouraging. It's got to be encouraging. It's got to be for people that are in not a really bad situation in other parts of the world. It's that type of where we're reaching out. I was listening to the lady who lost her sister, in Parliament, who got killed, and then we've had the other, and she was changing, and that was really weird because she said she's in Parliament. The lady that got killed, the young lady, lovely, I can't remember her name. It was her sister talking. She says she loves getting involved in the backroom stuff in Parliament, getting involved with all the things that don't go out on telly because it's not exciting. And she said it's the backroom stuff. She said things getting involved with schools or getting involved with other people and getting communities together, but they never put that out on the telly. They only put the other stuff out on the telly. And she said until it looks really good, when we see Parliament, they're always shouting at each other. And she said, you said we must get on, we've got to get on, and then you see Parliament come down, and it's all shouting. I mean, every time I've looked at Parliament, they're always shouting at each other.
Yeah, Sue.
Yeah. We need to respect each other, she's saying. Oh, that was it. She was on about people being accused of racism and all that. Should never be in any part of the world, or even anywhere. But it should be what they see, what we are, sort of thing. If you say something, you've got to be genuine.
Yeah.
So true, really.
Yeah.
Oh, people, yeah.
So what you're saying? Racism, it just isn't cricket, or is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cricket bloke, right. Yeah. It's a lot in our news at the minute.
And I think people know when you're unreal. Let's face it. If you're trying to put something on and it's not true, or you're not really living it, you think they just know, don't they? It's just for that moment, and it's a fleeting moment. Hopefully, when you can trust something, or trust the Lord, or trust someone, that it's their who they really are that really matters, and that's what shines out, isn't it?
And I think in our present age of media, and including social media, which we're sending this out on, in terms of media, we're almost trained to think media is what it's all about.
Yeah.
It's all about what's in the media that drives everything. But actually, there are some things that are beyond that underpin a lot of things. And actually, I think, if you keep your head down for a few weeks, the media stories that were there aren't there anymore. Sometimes something that was so key a month ago isn't key a month later. And actually, what are the real building blocks of society? What are the real building blocks of life? And I think it comes back to the character, consistency, walking that out, and letting the little breeze of the media breeze this way, breeze that way, but actually it's slowly building. Things come through in the end, and I think that's very often the case. Mandy?
Kind of remembered, I think, a little bit about what I was going to say. It was about the blame game, really. You mentioned about how they could have been really bitter because they'd been brought out of exile and God had punished them and stuff. But actually, by this time, God had punished their forefathers.
Yeah.
It's a bit like when the youngsters in the wilderness were stuck there for longer because the people before them had let them down. And I think that is quite topical at the moment on that wonderful thing called social media, because there's an awful lot of the blame game and people fighting for rights actually that they already have but didn't have 20 years ago. And I to risk going into controversial areas for Christian talk, but I've got a very good friend who runs a hate crime charity that he started because of what happened with the Soho bombing, and there was some horrendous atrocities. I mean, atrocities, not the subtle kind of stuff we have now against different people, but there was atrocities that had to be fought against. And I find it interesting that currently there seems to be an awful lot, because my parents did this, or the generation before us did this, because of that, we can't move on. But actually, in God, we can always move on, because God gives us the ability to move on. And that is what happened with Esther here. The people who went before her were punished by God. But she has used that situation that she was not responsible for to turn it around for good. And she hasn't, like I said before, she honoured her father. And he was part of that generation that probably had upset God. And, I think there's a few lessons for the church not to go down this line of blaming those who have gone before. I mentioned before I've sort of had a little dabble in my family history and stuff. And I just going back a couple of, three, 4 generations, I've got people in my family who'd be floating in their grave if they honestly knew what I did for a living, because they were always up before the magistrates, they were always up before the judges. Their sentences got longer and longer and longer because the magistrates were sick of seeing them. But in 3 generations, the family is not where that family
was.
But they are still my ancestors.
Yeah.
And I think, our family could have said there, well, this is our lot. We don't own any land, we haven't got any businesses, we don't have to vote, we are worthless. we're not going to go, we're not going to get any higher in life. And yet now I've got my youngest cousin who's about to do a PhD, and I think,
so
you know, things turn around when you don't keep living in the past. Learn from the past, but don't live in it. And I think that is what Esther did here. She didn't live in the past. She saw a future for her people, and not only did she see a future, she paved a future for them too.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, it's good, Mandy.
Yeah.
Sorry, Nige. I don't. Anyone else put their hand up yet? No. I was just thinking about when we're going through stuff and we're praying through stuff and you're seeking God in the midst of what you're going through. I found personally right now where I am at, you know, I feel you can, and no one can do this for you, only God, while working through with God day by day and listening and praying and, you know, and asking really. And I'm in a place now where I feel stronger. I'm at peace. I am at peace to a certain level. I'm much more adapting to situations. I'm much more. There's an opening. Yes, you know, I can do more things, not in isolation, thank goodness. But also, this path that I've asked God where to go, I feel is the right one at the moment. And when you know that, you get that peace. So we shouldn't go into things like if we feel frightened or intimidation or anxiety, because that's not the right way to go. Because God wouldn't put you there. You know what I mean? I just know. I never felt this before. I mean, you know, we all think about things. Oh, that's a good idea. Oh, that's a good idea. But and sometimes it is, and it is for that season, and that's fine. But don't let it determine you for other things. That's what I think. That's what I'm saying. Because when you go through times and God gives you that peace and that knowing, you just think, "That's it, Lord," because I'm at peace with this. This isn't me. This is you, and this is how I feel now, and that is so comforting, and it's so like it just gives you a different strength to perhaps step into something else if you need to, but you know the way. A bit like, you know, the way of the Lord comes to mind. But, you know, it's that sort of thing. And I'm sure that's how God works in many of us that ask and pray in life, because we can go off and do so many things that may not be the right thing. Yeah, so I just wanted to share that today. Yeah.
Thanks, Sue. It's wonderful. So I think we've got to the end of the book of Esther. I think it's been an interesting journey. We've gone lots of different places with it. There's lots of different challenges in it, and lots of twists and turns, and also how the church has interpreted it in the past. There's lots of twists and turns in terms of how the king is viewed in the story, and things like that. And I think it's interesting. There's so many lessons for us today from this old book, and how even things like things celebrated today came from the story all the way back to it. You just think, wow, you know, it gives us a much better understanding of others who celebrate those things. It gives us a better understanding of how some societies operate. So thank you very much. We'll leave it there. 3 minutes early. Whoa, there's a result. And we'll have a fresh book ready for tomorrow. Mystery book.
Hanging.
So we'll do that tomorrow. But thank you, everyone.